You know, we're given 2 ears and 1 mouth. And the reason for that is that we need to spend more time listening than we do talking. The careers that I've had include being a talk radio host, a podcaster, and a bartender. And I tend to talk a lot while I'm working, but I also tend to listen a lot. I had the opportunity to talk with Leslie Shore quite a few years ago. She wrote a book, Listen to Succeed, and the conversation was one of many that we had over the course of doing talk radio in La Crosse, Wisconsin. We developed a friendship. I believe this is the last time that we talked. I lost my job shortly after this conversation, but I remember talking to her about one of my skills being, as a talk show host, that you're basically a listener instead of a talker when doing interviews, and this is what she said.
Well, I think the skill that you have absolutely starts with the effective listening skill that you have, but then you add on to it, because of that effective listening, you're able to ask amazing questions.
Well, thank you. Mom, is that you? No, that's what my mom always says. Oh, you know. But, you know, it's funny because at work, Leslie, it's a lot easier for me to listen. I think it's because I'm here and I'm in my room and I'm ready, you know. But elsewhere, there's a lot of times that I'm not probably the best listener in the world. Yeah, that's my wife, you know. There's a lot of times it's like I hear Charlie Brown's teacher in the background. You know what I mean?
Yes. And I think what that points to is when you're at work and you're doing this particular job that we're doing right now, there's an intent in terms of this is what I am here for, this is what I have to do to be successful. And I don't think we hold that same intent elsewhere unless we actually specifically say to ourselves, my intent right now is to listen.
All right, let's work on that skill right now because you wrote the book Listen to Succeed, and I want to get better. It's a new year. Figure I want to learn a new skill or be better at a skill that I'm okay with some places. But how do you become a better listener in situations like at home or when your children are talking to you or when you're at a conference or at a meeting, which is boring as hell. I mean, how do you get yourself into that here and now state when you're not really in that here and now state?
It's a wonderful question, Bob. I think one of the issues is that we really don't practice being present. We don't practice pushing our ego aside so that we can listen effectively. And some real specific tips. First, you brought up the kids. And I want to attack that first because I think it's one of the things that parents can do to positively affect their child's self-esteem, which will last them forever. And that tip literally is have 5 minutes every day for each parent to be able to sit down with that child and just concentrate on them in a room where they won't be disturbed, where there are no cell phones, no TVs, none of that. Just so that they can talk and debrief. And what happens over a period of time is that by the time they become teenagers, when normally they won't talk to you, they actually will because it's habit and they're used to being listened to. But it takes discipline to make sure that happens every single day.
That's actually great advice. I know that when my kids were little, I always tried to get, you know, if I was talking to them, I'd scoot down and look them right in the eye to let them know that they're important. And I think a lot of times that stuff has paid off because sometimes my kids will just come down just to BS with me, and I think that's fantastic.
It is. And one of the things that I think children really begin to miss at about the age of 5 or 6 is by that time as parents, it's like, oh, they're so cute, but now they're really beginning to think and do things on their own. And maybe it's not so cute anymore, but that's really the exact time where this kind of one-on-one that is expected by both parties becomes something as a ritual that literally will bring them through their teenage years mostly unscathed, because they actually will listen to you because you're listening to them.
What about meetings then? Because I think we got the kid thing down, but there's times we all have meetings we have to go to, and it could be a work meeting or a church meeting or a school meeting or a who knows what kind of. I mean, it could be any kind of meeting. And there's times you know your intent is to, I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to take notes. Pretty soon I'm sleeping. I'm doodling. I got 84 things going on Facebook. I'm trying to play Tetris, and the guy up there is talking and bugging me, and
Okay, so I want to actually bring up two things. First of all, probably about 75% of meetings never should happen because they are pushing out information meetings. Well, you can do that so many other different ways rather than a face-to-face meeting. That's what email is for. Those kinds of meetings do create a situation in you where, wow, couldn't they just write that down? I could take it in better. I can reread. They're not asking anything of me. But those other 25% of the meetings is where that effective listening is critical, because that listening leads to critical thinking, leads to great problem solving. However, in those meetings where they're not asking anything of you but to listen, because they're just pushing out information and asking, okay, do you guys understand? Taking notes is about the only way to stay engaged with your cell phone off. And if you take notes on a computer, well, let's make sure that that Word document or whatever app you're using is the only thing that is up. And Bob, I can tell you, I have actually suggested to corporate folk that they really look at what the heck is this meeting for? Are you boring the people that are coming to it, or are you using their brains for what you hired them for? And they begin to look at things differently, and all you can do is just have the intent to stay engaged for as long as you can.
You know, what's funny about meetings is that I've got friends that actually have to do some traveling for work, and they'll travel to Chicago or Florida or California for a 2-hour meeting and then fly back. It's like, wait a second here. So you flew out for 2 hours, so you basically wasted a day and a half to go to a 2-hour meeting. And what did you accomplish?
Yeah, and for what? I mean, if they want you out there as part of a problem-solving group, right on.
Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's like, how do the companies are wasting millions of dollars, I think, on a lot of this stuff. Leslie, can anybody be a good listener?
Absolutely. It's a skill that can be learned. And hearing is physiology, and if we're lucky, we are able to do that. That comes with a package, so to speak. But because listening is a process that puts everything that you are listening to and kind of seeing with your eyes in terms of body language and facial expression, mm-hmm. all of that gets processed. And to be able to push aside some of the barriers that get in the way of effective listening, that is where the skill comes in. To recognize what's happening, push it aside, and get back to listening. And anybody can do that if they practice.
What are some of the bigger barriers that we have to all basically overcome?
Well, I would say there are two really major barriers, and the first one is the emotional triggers. And within that, everyone has words that make them see red, that make them stop listening, that make them rant in their head. Don't they realize that that word is really negative? They should use this word or this word, and by the time you're finished ranting inside your head, you've not been listening to what the person continues to say. so it's really important that people write down what I call the top 10 words that make them see red.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out the year, how old they were, when that became a problem, and what the situation was. And the reason I have people do that is because if you were called ugly in 4th grade, then what happens is, when that word is used, you go back to that age. That's where you're listening from, and that's where you're responding from. But as soon as you understand what your top 10 are, you now are at choice to say, oh, there's that emotional word, I'm pushing it aside, and I'm getting back to listening.
I find that for me, a lot of times for listening, is to shut up. You know what I mean? Because I really have to. If I'm in a meeting and I know it's going to be, I'm an emotional person, so I know that, and I know that somebody's going to say something, and if I get irritated, I'm going to just jump in and just start ranting. So I just have to write down a big S on a piece of paper sometimes, just for me to just shut up.
And I think that's wonderful. That is something you've put in place to allow yourself to get back to listening. And it can be really difficult sometimes, depending on the person who you're listening to. But I think one of the things that's important to remember, Bob, is that when we listen to others, we are actually honoring them. We're actually giving them a platform. We make them feel valued. And the more we can do that for people, the better off their self-esteem and dignity becomes. And that only helps kind of raise the energy in the room, so to speak. And after a while, those people who sometimes just speak because they are not listened to at home or weren't listened to as a child, now realize that when they speak, they don't have to do it to gain control. They now just do it because they have something to say. And that can be a real epiphany for them.
Is that all covered in your book, Listen to Succeed?
It is indeed. That's the whole first chapter is the reason for listening, why it's so important, and what it does for you and others.
All right, I have to add, because I've opened up the book a few times while we're talking, and every time that I've opened it, I've opened it up to the page, it says the word touch on it. So I have to ask, why touch when it comes to listening?
Oh, well, I think part of this is we have to remember that we come as a full package. And I would say all of our tools that we have are tools that can be used to let someone know that we are listening to them. There are two things. One is if I'm listening to someone and we're just face-to-face, and I put my hand on their arm, just for, a little touch, it tells them that I'm really engaged in what is going on. And I feel that I'm engaged. They know I'm engaged. And when the speaker knows that the listener is engaged, it's an invitation to continue and have their whole thought come out instead of wondering whether or not they should say everything.
Leslie Shore, Listen to Succeed, the name of the book. And then I guess finally, Leslie, the final question I have today is, how do you shut off that inner monologue? Because, I mean, we've talked about sitting through meetings and being engaged and being a part of that, or talking to our kids or spouses or things like that. But there's always that, for me at least, there's always those, there's always those things that are there, or some sarcastic thing that just pops into my head. How do you shut that stuff off?
Here's the thing. I don't think you can shut it off. I think you can rein it in. You can control it. I think that if you go in with a particular intent to listen, that will lower some of that mind chatter. But if it is really annoying you, your own mind chatter, maybe it's not a good time to have the conversation with whomever you're speaking. And you may have to say, for some reason I'm having a barrier to effective listening. Can we have this conversation even in a half hour when I get all this other stuff out of my head? That's something that you can do, and it can be very effective, because then, again, the person feels honored that you recognize that you really had a barrier to listening well to them, and you care enough about them to say that. I think the other thing is, and this is something that I do, is I carry a small wire notebook, with those little 3x-whatevers, and with a pen. And when I'm with people, if my mind begins to do a chatter, and the yeah, but, or there's something sarcastic, I'll just write down a couple of words so that I can let it go. And that really helps. And the only other thing that I can say, Bob, and it's tough, because for those folks who are intelligent and have a way with words, unfortunately, sarcasm does come up, but in a conversation, unless you're really joking around, it's good that it is unsaid. I'm glad it's just in the head and not coming out of the mouth, because sarcasm actually is the most damaging of communication, because you really don't know how the other person is going to take it.
I wish I would have known that while I was still in high school, Leslie. Leslie, be sure. Listen to Succeed. How do we find your book, Leslie?
You can find it on my website, along with the listening effectiveness profile that measures which of the barriers are the ones you need most help with. And the book is also available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com.
What's your website?
ListenToSucceed.com. Can't get any easier than that.
Thanks so much for listening to the BS with Bob podcast. Basically, it's just me pulling up the metaphorical bar stool and chatting with everyone from entertainers to educators to business owners to marketing gurus. People who've done cool things, survived weird stuff, and have a good story to tell. Please like, subscribe, and share the podcast.